Hello, everybody, and welcome to the reality show brought to you by the Ayn Rand Center UK, where we apply the practical philosophy of objectivism to everything. Today, I've got a great panel with me, Amy Nasir and Robert Lewis. We're going to be joined by another person at some point in the show, and we're going to discuss three topics, as we usually do, the Holy Trinity. The first topic was a letter, I think, that was sent to the Telegraph. Some poor guy with a family of five, one of whom was autistic, had a massive, horrible traveling experience with EasyJet and wrote out the entire experience to the newspaper, which then published it for us to judge it one way or the other. Was this appropriate to do? We can talk about the particulars of what this poor person experienced. I think it's a combination of, just nature and unfortunate service. I don't know that he deserves all of the recompense that he probably thinks he should get, but it's certainly an interesting story. We'll talk about the details of that as we go on. The second story is Hunter Biden, of course, has been in the news quite a bit if you watch any of the right-wing news outlets or read any more conservative journals. If you're more on the left, you probably haven't seen any of this and are wondering why in the heck Hunter Biden is being indicted on charges of illegal gun possession. Well, that's certainly happening now. He's about to be prosecuted for that. What do you think of this? What about his wider drug use, or even the charges of corruption that may extend into the White House and to his father? That mysterious $17 million to $20 million that the Biden family's made off of foreign governments. There's no evidence for that, they say. Anyway, we'll be discussing that at some point. And there is a very interesting article in The Guardian about whether or not it's ethical to own pets. I found this article surprisingly complex, and it brought up some very interesting issues for me. Now, as an objectivist, I don't believe that there are such things as rights for animals, but certainly we should treat all sentient beings with respect and respect their natures as best we can, and certainly not inflict unnecessary pain or harm on them. But this brought up some interesting issues that I think can make for some good discussion fodder. But let's deal with this first guy who had this terrible experience on an EasyJet flight from Mallorca, I guess going back to the UK. There was a terrible thunderstorm. They got delayed for about 22 hours. And then when they attempted to get back on the flight, his autistic, which they had trouble doing, by the way, and accommodating a family of five, which they were sort of left out in the cold by EasyJet with respect to that. When they got back on the flight, his autistic daughter had a complete meltdown because she was very anxious about flying into a storm. Understandable, but they removed them from the flight, and that caused further delays. And they were promised an emergency rescue flight, which never came. And the man ended up spending something like 2,500 pounds of extra money, finally getting back home after a 5 or 6 day delay, missing work, and very upset. A lot of it understandably so. Amy, what make you of this complicated situation, and how does objectivist philosophy, or an objectivist, a normie like us who aren't philosophers but have objectivist philosophy, how would you deal with a situation like this? Was it appropriate what this guy did?
Well, it was fine that what he did. Of course, EasyJet, by the way, I looked them up. They are a low cost airline, so they're constantly trying to, cut their budget. No pretzels or peanuts, no any extras or anything like that. But they did, I guess, have some kind of service that the family managed to arrange beforehand to help their autistic daughter. It's kind of a special needs sort of accessibility sort of helping program that EasyJet should have provided them, which was thrown out the window after the weather got bad and they had to cancel the flights, and then they had to stay overnight. And then I found that this person who was managing all of this was very patient, almost though too patient. I think I didn't catch in the letter if he went around and he asked for help, And then somebody promised a rescue flight, and the next person said, I have no idea what you're talking about. And nowhere in this did I hear this person say, can I speak to your supervisor? Sometimes you have to release your inner Karen, as it were. Apologies to those people who are named Karen. But you really do. Except in a situation now, if you are completely overloaded, you do have a special needs child and you're trying to calm them down, I think the best situation is what they did. They ended up getting on the plane, the second plane. Their autistic child had a kind of a mental emotional breakdown, and then they had to disembark. They basically kicked them off the plane because the child was not controllable. So
I mean, you have maybe for our viewers who haven't read this piece, they should know that the child was tearing its hair out, biting itself, scratching itself, screaming at the top of its lungs. Very, very disruptive. But sort of the other side of this is they weren't just disembarked; they were left on the tarmac, to fend for themselves. A family of 5 with an autistic child. That's pretty bad.
Yes. It's awful. It's awful. And nowhere also did I hear the person say, I want to talk to your supervisor. I'm calling my lawyer. And I also have friends at whatever UK agency there is. This is similar to the FAA or something. You might be reaching a little bit there, but sometimes you have to get customer services attention in that way. It's an awful thing to have to do, but that sometimes is necessary.
You're saying this person, in a sense, suffered from a lack of self-esteem, and that they didn't go to the top. They didn't override the people they were directly dealing with to say, hey, I was promised this stuff.
Yes.
It's your obligation to fulfill that side of the contract with me. Mark, what say you? This is an economy airline. You end up giving up a lot, but should you give up service? Good service? What say you to this?
Well, so the question is, should you give it up? It's like, well, it's a voluntary transaction. You are expecting things from the airline. They're delivering to you so that they can build their reputation. And if you don't deliver service, people do things like write letters to editors and have them published in papers saying your customer service sucks, and that's going to impact your future sales. Obviously it's tragic what happened to the family. It's tragic. Well,
let's hope EasyJet compensates him because of this editorial. I think Amy's right. A lot of it could have been averted had he gone straight to the top and requested management to really help him with this. I know that when I've had issues with airlines, I'm lucky that I have a big social media following, because I just go straight to social media. I'm like, look what's happening here. And automatically I get a DM from the airline that's like, how can we improve the situation? Well, I'll tell you how. Stop sucking. But they did have an obligation to provide a service for the autistic child that they did not. They did, I think, have an obligation to make them whole, which they did not. Even if they're an economical airline, they're saving money. They have obligations to their customers to fulfill a service that they clearly did not. Keith, did you get a chance to read this article at all? This letter, and what did you think about it?
I only had a chance to skim email this morning. I've been nonstop calls for the last 3 hours or so, but I certainly agree with Amy. I mean, the absolute first thing is to ask to speak to the supervisor. And then if the supervisor is just, barely half a notch above the person you're talking to, ask to speak to the supervisor's supervisor. That's just, how to navigate a system that can be, big crony corporations that are protected by all sorts of perverse regulations. That's just, the minimum survival skills. I've done an awful lot of travel around the world in the last, year or so. And no, I travel alone generally for business. I'm not autistic. I don't have an autistic kid with me, so I don't have those issues. But I can say that travel is often bruising, and the bruises come either the design of the system, the security theater that they have, or it's the intersection or overlap between different entities that, security makes you late. And then because you're late, you have another problem and nobody wants to take ownership of responsibility for it. And all these sort of unfortunate things happen. And I've done that too. I go to social media and I'll say at American Airlines and, get them to maybe do something or maybe not. But, as I read the situation, and maybe there's a lot I don't know about it, it seems like part of this is there was a contract with the airline for some extra service beyond just the budget ticket, in which case if the airline didn't deliver that, they're in breach, and contract law should ultimately obligate them. Maybe you have to call an attorney to push them a little bit, and then part of it is it seems like this person says, well, my child has a need, as if that is a prima facie proof that therefore everybody was obligated to deal with them. And obviously part of the problem is, okay, so they're kicked off the plane, which the person is complaining about, but it seems that kicking off the plane was the right thing to do because that child was very disruptive to other passengers and to the staff on the plane, and airlines are not tolerant of that. Okay, they're kicked off. The airline clearly is running so lean, they don't literally have any staff to deal with if someone's off the plane, so then the person's standing on the tarmac. Well, okay, number one, common sense. There's a door from the tarmac to get back into the terminal. Take yourself and walk through that door, and then there will be airline staff, or there's a counter somewhere. So there's a sort of a passivity. Maybe again, there's some facts I'm not aware of here, but there's a passivity that I think these people had, which is also consistent with not asking for the supervisor. They're just expecting the world to deliver whatever it is they need, not being delivered. Then they're just frustrated and crying and standing on the tarmac. I can't see why anybody would stand on the tarmac. I don't get that. Walk through the door, get back into the terminal. All paths forward for your life and your future involve going back into the terminal. There's nothing left for you on the tarmac. The plane is left, right? Which sucks. And this is a very frustrating situation, but you have to, the world of the airport is not a benevolent universe. There are all sorts of things. I mean, they keep having announcements. If you leave your baggage unattended for a moment, we're going to steal it from you and destroy it. There's all these hostile, malevolent things that are going on. You're constantly under suspicion of being a terrorist or a criminal or a drug dealer or worse. You have to keep your wits about you. You have to keep your possessions about you. They make that difficult sometimes. They sneer at you. I've traveled with multiple laptops, and so I try to be very proactive to make sure my laptops aren't one of them, going into the belt, but the other one being behind, so somebody can steal it.
Hey, Keith, I have to say this as a frequent flyer myself. One of the things that really bugs me now is the way they've got these when you have to unpack your bags and take off your coat, they've got it on a conveyor belt. So half your stuff ends up going way, way ahead of you. And I always get concerned about my electronic stuff, any passports I may have, being way up on that conveyor belt, being stolen by somebody before I could get to it. I got my eye on it. Like you said, I feel like I'm in the Amazon jungle and I am a panther keeping an eye on prey.
Yeah, you have to maintain a very watchful, active eye, right? Looks like an animal that has a piece of food, knowing all the animals, other animals are going to steal it. This is just the world of the airport, whether you have a disability or not. And now, should the airports be this way? No, they shouldn't. This is essentially a breakdown of civilization, ultimately. But this person encountered this, and there's a lot of that sucks. It isn't the airline's fault. If air traffic control unreasonably delayed the flight, and then one of the things you run into is then you run into an intersection with union rules, right? The pilot in particular, but also the crew, are only allowed to have so many hours on before they're mandated so many hours off.
That is the worst. I have waited for 3 hours to get on a plane, and just as they're ready to board, they say, I'm sorry, the crew has to change out. We have to wait for another 2 or 3 hours for the new crew.
Right, and then, by the way, that's going to be tomorrow morning, and then, there's no more seats on the tomorrow morning flight. I've seen all kinds of stuff like that, and it's just a very malevolent environment. And then, that's very frustrating, but nobody's going to compensate you for any of that, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, they don't. But Mark, I want to touch on something Keith said, because he touched on something wider, and I got this impression too from the article. There was an expectation on the part of the family, not just for service, but for extra something because their child was disabled, extra understanding on the part of other people, a certain something, an expectation that made them passive, as if they expected the world to come to them and cater to their needs. I've noticed this in a wider respect with the younger generations, a kind of passivity where they're expecting the world to come to them. Do you think some of the aspects of this article reflected that, a wider social phenomenon that's happening today?
Well, I certainly got that. And it raises the question, right? Again, like in terms of objectivism, what is the fundamental question? Because your child has special needs, does that mean that it's the world's duty to adjust itself in order to meet your specific situation?
Yeah.
And I think there's two ways of answering the question. The first is, well, no, you have special needs, you have special desires. It's your responsibility to manage what's required in order to satisfy them. But then there's this question of reputation, and what does the store, what does the provider, what does the airline want to project to its clients? What is a standard? What is their obligation beyond the contract? What is expected? And it's a really interesting question for businesses. How much do you want to adjust your business processes so that you can handle these special needs cases? And then how much of that do you make your PR? We address these special need cases. Work with us rather than someone else. It can become a competitive advantage or a competitive disadvantage. In this case, I think it's a competitive disadvantage, except that it's a budget airline, right? You're not using this airline thinking, aha, I am using this one because I need special service. Now, I think the key where all of this hinges is that they did buy a special service for their child so that their child would not be stressed getting onto the plane. And that was not provided at the time when they actually got on the plane and the child was stressed. Now, I think there's another question that comes into it, which is, I bought my plane ticket and I want to leave when it said it was going to leave. And this whole weather thing, right? The fact that there's storms and it's dangerous, that should not come into play. We don't care about reality, right? Like, oh, we're flying planes through storms. That doesn't matter. What matters is we said I was going to buy it. And I think that's the other part that I got from this article, is that the person just had, well, yes, it was a storm, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that I was inconvenienced. And yes, my daughter was freaked out, not because they were treated poorly, but because they were afraid of flying through a storm. And it seems that it was a combination that reality did not facilitate this person's trip. And then the airline didn't go above and beyond and didn't fulfill on their responsibilities. And
also the fact, I think Keith has a very healthy perspective on airports. You really have to look at it as a malevolent universe. You really have to go into an animal predatorial mode to protect your own interests there. Otherwise, you are going to be doomed. But Amy, do you see anything? Go ahead. I can see you jumping.
First of all, I think the phrase there is ethics of emergencies. When you're in a situation where, whether that's you're going to the ER and you have to wait, and you have a pressing issue and you can't get right in, and everything's overloaded, there's not a lot of staff, things like that. You really do have to, of course, fend for yourself, make sure that your needs are first. And you do need to keep your wits about you in those situations and ask yourself, is there an alternative here? Can I go to a different hospital? How can I think outside the box with this? I think in this situation, this is a parent with an autistic child and maybe a couple of other children and maybe another parent. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, it sounds like they weren't entirely familiar with how to handle themselves in a customer service situation, especially at an airline. But I do have to give them a little bit of credit for what they did do. They didn't actually fly back. They took a ferry. They took I think a bullet train or something like that.
Yeah, they took Eurostar. Yeah.
Yeah, they did what they needed to do to keep things under control. They actually consulted a doctor in the place that they were at to help their child calm down, and get some medicine. They did a lot of really, really good things, really amazing things, considering the situation that they were in. They were in sort of like an ethics of emergency, left on the tarmac, things like that. So, I can't fault them for that much, but yes, people need to be very much aware of the fact, do you, ask for the manager, ask for the supervisor, ask for a number to the corporate office, post on Twitter, let people know what you're doing and say, listen, I want to be in your court here. I'm going to go ahead and post this on Twitter, but before I do, I want to give you an opportunity to help me out first. I'm going to call the corporate office, but before I do, I want to give you an opportunity to help me out first. And then, try to help the customer service representatives kind of think outside of their box, possibly. And, but yeah, it's unfortunate that the air travel is such an ethics of emergency situation. But it's something that you definitely need to face, and you need to know your rights as an airline passenger. You need to understand, if something does go wrong, especially in a situation where you're dealing with a special needs child, what are my backup plans if plan A doesn't go through?
Sure. Keith, given all these complications, do you think the airline owes them something?
It's an interesting question. The other thing I was going to add is every business, there are edge cases or corner cases to the business process. And it sounds like among many other things that happened here, one of the things that happened is the airline was all set to provide whatever the special service was that the customer paid for on the original scheduled flight. But on the rescheduled flight, they didn't have that capability or that resource there anymore. So something basically fell through the cracks. This is a corner case that their business process didn't really anticipate. And then on top of it being left on the tarmac, they didn't have any personnel, to spare to even say, hey, look, come back into the, the terminal. Assuming there was a contract that they paid extra to get this, which I'm a little bit dubious of because a budget airline, it's usually not that airline to do that in the first place, but assuming there was a contract and assuming that they paid, the legal concept is paid, consideration in exchange, actually paid more money for this, it seems like the airline would at least be responsible to pay back their money plus whatever reasonable accommodations that they had to provide for on their own, the Eurostar and the ferry and the doctor's visit and all that stuff. Maybe not the doctor visit, I guess they had to do anyway once they're canceled. Seems like the airline would have some monetary responsibility to make them whole on it. If your business doesn't have a process that can handle a certain case, and that case happens, you're not off the hook as a business just because you couldn't handle the case any more than somebody with special needs is automatically entitled just because they have a special need. Right. The law should be pretty black and white. Okay, you signed a contract, you took extra money from this passenger to do X for them, above and beyond, provide the seat. You didn't do X. Yes, we understand why. Okay, this wasn't malicious, this wasn't premeditated, but you didn't do what you said you were going to do. You owe them back that money plus some sort of damage plus whatever reasonable cost that they incurred to get themselves home via another way. That would seem reasonable to me.
That seems reasonable to me. Mark, what say you? Do you agree with Keith?
Absolutely. From a legal perspective, of course, the airline would be idiotic to actually let it get to a judge determining what the response is, partially because the damages are going to be, it's not just the cost of the hotel and things, it's the psychological traumatic experience that the family went through, pain and suffering, as the legal term puts it. And they did speak to a number of different representatives of the company, and the representatives of the company seemed to have told them to go, punch sand, right? Like, you are out of luck, you have no standing here. And so I think the airline is going to end up paying for this out of court. They didn't go on Twitter before Like Amy said it exactly. I'm about to do this thing, right?
Yeah.
You don't want that, right? And they did go to the paper, and we're talking about it. So I think the airline should pay for it and will pay for it because they bought the service and paid consideration for it, and that was not delivered. Even if in their contract it says sometimes planes get delayed and this service will be null and void in that case. Even if that's the case, I think legally they're just going to be on the hook for it, and to avoid that, they're going to end up paying.
I mean, I would say the same thing, Amy. I mean, a business survives by virtue of its reputation. People don't realize that now because of the regulatory state sort of takes up a lot of that responsibility, unfortunately, sucks the oxygen out of the room, but still they want a good reputation. Do you think the airline should compensate these folks?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think they will. I think they will, and maybe even more. They might give them a free voucher to some future air flight.
Because I want to fly that airline again after that experience. I'll tell you.
At least it's something. It's something.
It's a redemption story.
Yeah. I mean, it can be. Yeah. I think it should be, and it can be.
Yeah, that's true. I have a couple of super chats here. Jonathan Honing for $4.99. Thank you, Jonathan. Buster Jones gives us $5. Apollo Zeus for £2 wants to know if I have any Oleg Taktarov anecdotes. Any more Oleg Taktarov? For any of those you guys who do not know UFC, Oleg Taktarov was one of a UFC heavyweight champion for a little bit. He's an expert in the Russian martial art Sambo, and he's quite an interesting character. And he happened to be an acting student of mine for a while. And I think the anecdote he is referring to is a time where the other acting teachers were afraid of Oleg because he's a scary guy. They called him the Russian bear, and nobody would teach him. So he just started doing anything he wanted up on stage, and it was mostly bad. And I was the only one to critique him. And when he questioned me, I said, Oleg, check it out. If I want to learn how to fight, I'm going to go to you in the ring. This is my ring. You're in my ring now. You're learning from me. And from that point on, he was as docile as a cub grizzly. Anyway, but I don't have any other anecdotes. Even though we worked on National Treasure together, I don't have any anecdotes with him. Sorry, Apollo Zeus. But thanks for the £2. We're going to go on to the next topic, which is Hunter Biden is about to be prosecuted for this trippy gun stuff, where he falsely applied. He put false information on a form applying for a firearm, denied that he was on drugs, all kinds of lies going on there. Which and the three charges that are against him amount to something like 20 years prison time, hundreds of thousands of dollars in potential fines, none of which I think we can safely say he will probably ever see. I don't think he'll see any prison time. I don't think he'll pay a cent. Maybe they'll make him pay a few $1,000s just to appease people who are seeing the two-tiered system as it's happening now. But what do you think about this prosecution? Is it a distraction from the wider cases that are mounting against Hunter Biden and the implications of his father's nefarious dealings while he was vice president? Amy, what do you think about this whole crazy thing?
Okay, this man is 53 years old. Back in 2018, he was a heavy user of crack cocaine. I mean, crack cocaine. I mean, you might as well say heroin on top of that. And I mean, I don't understand exactly how he got away, how he didn't die from all of his experiences. And I don't know. But at the time, he actually bought a Colt Cobra special revolver at a Delaware gun store. And he falsely claimed that he was not an unlawful user of and addicted to any stimulant narcotic drug. Oops, I forgot to mention that crack cocaine. I don't quite see how he's going to at least, I mean, I think that he's probably at least going to have probation. I would love to see him on the side of the road with an orange vest on, picking up trash, doing community service myself. But I guess this is his first, he's not a violent offender. He's not, I guess he has had a fairly clean record. I'm sure because we know that, you know, he is the president's son. And perhaps he got into, I can only imagine he got into trouble before and it was just hushed. but now, he can't escape the fact that this is, all the details are out there, and he should at least have probation. I don't know if he's going to get it. I can't imagine that he wouldn't, because they have to do something. It's equal justice before the law. Anyway.
That's what they keep claiming as they're prosecuting Trump, but it certainly doesn't seem to apply to Democrats. I mean, this is a case that almost went through the statute of limitations. Keith, what do you make of this? Is it a distraction? Should they throw the book at him?
First thing to note is that sometimes the charges they get somebody on are far lesser. Like they got Al Capone on tax evasion.
Mm-hmm.
There's a guy who's committed, I don't know how many murders, the case of Capone, and they put him in jail for tax evasion. I think there's a lot to unpack here. And the first question is, should it be illegal? I mean, it's one thing to say it's self-destructive to take crack cocaine. Should it be illegal? I don't think it should be. Secondly, should there be a mandatory federal form that one has to sign on penalty of perjury to get a firearm, that one has to testify to one's use of drugs or whatever? I don't think so either. So he's guilty of breaking a law that probably is not a legitimate law in the first place. And then there's the equal justice thing. Okay, do you have to throw the book at him just because politically you have to show balance, that you're going after Trump for trying to force election officials to overturn an election, misappropriating classified documents? So as some sort of counterbalance to that, to compensate for that, we have to throw Hunter Biden in prison for 20 years for this. I'm not really sure that directly trades off that way. The whole thing just seems like a mess. Hunter Biden is clearly a bad guy. I mean, I think that's a pretty safe thing to say at this point. So in a certain sense, if he goes to jail, maybe it isn't justice to go to jail for this, but it feels like justice for all the other things that he was involved in that seem crooked and corrupt, that get to, how this country is governed, but which he may never be charged with and may never go to jail for. But if he goes to jail for this, is that justice? Well, in a certain sense it is, but what a hell of a basis to form a criminal justice system. Well, we know you're guilty for all this other shit that we can't charge you with, so we're going to throw you in prison for 20 years for filling out a form wrongfully. Is that really justice? Well, I don't know. I'd like to see the real.
I doubt he's going to see any prison time. I think Amy's right. If he does get something, it'll be something like probation, house arrest, something really soft, something that's any other person out there who committed a quote unquote crime like this. And I have to agree with you, Keith. It's all bogus. We shouldn't have to fill out federal forms to procure a firearm. That is our Second Amendment right to self-defense. So that in itself is wrong. The whole drug war itself is wrong. We could do shows on that, why it's morally wrong for us to and how often it violates our civil liberties, that the fact that we've given the government so much power over our lives through these drug wars, that's definitely a lot to unpack there. Mark, what do you think?
Let me just interject one thing about he's never going to do jail time. The fact that they charged him says something about all this. And they were saying, remember Sam Bankman-Fried, the fraudster, and with the FTX crypto exchange? Everyone said he's going to get away with it. He'll never be extradited. Well, he was extradited. And then they gave him a really soft not probation, I guess bail deal pending his trial. He's never going to see jail time. Then it was a couple of weeks ago when the judge said, you know what, it's so obvious that you're obviously going to go to jail for some of this stuff. Let's just start it early. You don't get to stay out on bail anymore. You get to go to jail starting now. And then he was forced to go to jail. So I wouldn't necessarily be so confident. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if he walked, but it wouldn't surprise me if he did go to jail for a few years over this as well.
I think the political atmosphere is pretty vitriolic, but I still think he's going to get off. Somebody like Bankman, he was a multi-billionaire at one time. There's people want to eat billionaires now. I think it's easier for him to serve time for the judge just to do that. I think the prosecutor's probably doing it, making the whole case for cosmetics anyway with Hunter Biden. I think he's going to get off. Anyway, Mark, what do you think about this? I mean, not get off. I think he's going to be penalized in some way, but I don't think he's going to see time in jail. We should make a bet on this, Keith. Just like a gentleman's bet, or like $5 or something like that.
I don't have a strong opinion that he will do, Jill. I'm just saying it wouldn't surprise me if he did.
Okay, copy that. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah. So again, political theater. What is politics? Politics seems to me just to be more and more theater. And the part about this that actually upsets me, as much as it shouldn't, as much as I should be used to it by now, is politics distorting justice. This is exactly what we don't want. We have a justice system. We entrust a certain set of functions to the state because the state is a universal way of applying force, of having a legal system. And to the degree that we corrupt that legal system, we are corrupting the foundation of our society. And going after Trump, going after Hunter Biden around a gun form, all the things that he's being accused of, all of the evidence that we have, and we're going after him for that.
Wait a minute. You know, the left keeps saying there is no evidence, and if they say it enough, it's going to be true.
Yes, I mean the money that he made. I mean, so on the face of it, his skills versus the money he was paid just don't make any sense. The fact that he was on trips, like, those are the things that actually matter. The fact that Biden like put Ukraine, the United States financial support to Ukraine on the line, unless they fired the prosecutor who was going after Burisma in Ukraine. I don't know if you guys have seen that video of Biden bragging that he said, look, these billions of dollars you're supposed to get, you will not get it unless you fire this prosecutor. And he bragged about it. And they said, well, we need to talk to Obama. He said, I'm the authority here. Call him. I'm the authority. And if it's not done in the next 12 hours, you're not getting it. And then you know what? He was fired. And he bragged about that in a public forum.
Yeah, not very smart. Well, it just goes to show you that.
That is what matters.
It just goes to show you that that's not a very smart thing to do. And it just goes to show you, if you're not very smart and you want to become a millionaire, get into politics.
Yeah. So it's the thing that matters for me is justice. Like we say, equal application under the law. Well, then it should be equal. That's the thing that matters. That's the basis on which everything else is built. And this political theater, for partisan purposes, you know, I'm of course disgusted by Trump. I'm disgusted by Biden, right? I am happy that they are appropriately held to account for what they have done. That seems to me to be very valuable for the structure of our country, the foundation out of which we're building.
That's
the part that matters to me. In this.
Being appropriately held accountable is something that remains to be seen, as far as I'm concerned. Ashley Shrugged agrees with you, Mark. For $4.99, she says he should get the same punishment I would if I did this. It's a slap in the face of normal citizens to allow the political class special privileges. Yes, this is true. Jeff Bannister gives us $3 Canadian. What is that in American? I'm not sure. But thank you, Jeff. Amy, any final words on Mr. Hunter Biden?
Yeah, I mean, he should have equal justice before the law, and the same. But now, this is the question, though: is should you be penalized under the law if you are, say, for instance? Okay, well, I think we all agree if you have an occasional marijuana and you lie on the form or whatever to get a gun. Okay, and it's not a 20-year offense there. This man was heavily addicted to crack cocaine, and what is he doing with a gun? So I guess that's sort of a devil's advocate question for you. And would it be also appropriate to penalize people for drinking it? Well, I think obviously for drinking and driving. And is that a comparable case to somebody who is using crack cocaine and using a gun.
That's very interesting, because I think objectivists, there's a wide split on the Second Amendment. Guys like Yaron Brooks say, the government does have a responsibility to regulate weapons in some way. I think there's a reasonable use category where, of course, libertarians would say you could own a nuclear weapon. It's the market that prevents you from doing that, or a howitzer, as they did in the 18th century, as private citizens did. It's the market that keeps you from doing that, not necessarily your right. I think you have to demonstrate, reasonable defensibility for an individual, but within that sphere, the government can have no regulatory power as long as you are defending yourself. So I don't know, Keith, if this bleeds into what you're saying. That's why I say there shouldn't be a federal form that you have to fill out, and drug use is irrelevant unless and until you damage somebody else's life.
Well, if there's an analogy to driving drunk, there's nothing that says you're not allowed to own a car if you get drunk. The rule is you can't drive it while you're in a drunk condition. And I think the same thing would be true if you're taking crack cocaine and using the gun versus you have a crack cocaine habit and the gun is safely locked away most of the time. But I think this gets to the whole basis of the regulatory state, and the doctrine is called prior restraint. And I believe the founders had a lot of debate about this, of whether you should have, essentially unlimited rights until you commit a crime, and then they go after you for the crime you actually did commit and prove it, versus try to restrain you beforehand to somehow engineer for it not to be possible for you to commit the crime in the first place because you're restrained by some sort of regulatory apparatus. And I think you framed the issue well. There's no such thing as a right to own a personal nuclear weapon, because the word personal is a complete contradiction to nuclear weapon. It's not personal. By its very nature, it has a giant blast radius. You cannot use it for self-defense. But a handgun clearly is a self-defense weapon, and therefore there shouldn't be prior restraint until you pick it up and use it in a crime. And in a rational society, that's an exceedingly rare thing.
It is, and I would also say, Keith, that an AR-15 and an AK-47 also fall under that category, because it's a tool for a particular purpose, right? When there's a riot going on in the streets, the police don't go in there with their handguns; they go in there with AK-47s and AR-15s or some version of that, and that's how they quell mob violence, and that's how you can protect yourself against a mob.
Right, versus an 88 millimeter, flak gun, yes, or a nuclear weapon, or these things are not personal. So I think there's absolutely an objective line on what's a weapon for personal defense versus not. But if it is a weapon for personal defense, I don't see any business of the government to regulate it, because regulate it ultimately means prior restraint. It means they're initiating the use of physical force against innocent people on some sort of utilitarian grounds. Well, we're going to lower the effective murder rate this way. And the ironic observation of the whole thing, the more they do this, the worse the crime rate gets across the board. Now, I happen to live in Arizona, where for the longest time, since forever, it's been legal to open carry. You need a license to conceal. 10 years ago, they repealed the license to conceal. But during the open carry days, you could walk into a gun store with no forms and nothing, no background check until the federal thing came in relatively recently. Buy a gun, buy ammo, buy a holster, lock and load, strap it on, and walk down the street. That's always been this way in Arizona. And Arizona has always had a low violent crime rate. I think it's constitutional carry as well in either New Hampshire or Vermont. I forget which state, but also extremely low gun violence in that state. Yeah, and the crime we have here is property crime. And I've had a cop tell me this, like when they rob your house, they're watching to see when you're there and when you're not there. And the robberies occur at 2 PM. They do not want to run into the homeowner, because the homeowner is probably armed in Arizona. And so, the people, it's not violent crime. And if the theory was keep the guns out of the hands of criminals by regulation, if that theory were true, then Arizona should have a very high gun crime rate, and places where it's almost impossible to get a gun, like New York City or Chicago, should have a very low crime rate. So even the utilitarian argument fails, even on its own stated terms.
I think John Lott Jr. has pointed out that in every school district where teachers are allowed to carry concealed firearms, there has been zero, as in zero, gun violence, as opposed to the gun-free zones, which are essentially target practice. Now, at this point, it's for criminals. At this point, it's impossible to make the case that you're making children safer by making these places gun-free zones, because we have the testimonials of the criminals themselves. We have them saying straight out, "I've had the choice between this place or this place. I chose this place because I knew nobody would be there to stop me." We know that they try to acquire casualties before they kill themselves or die by the police. And they can only do that in a place where people are defenseless. But we're getting slightly off track. But
to piggyback on one thing Keith said,
yeah,
there is the concept of probable cause, which is that we have reason to believe that someone is about to commit a crime. And so we intervene in that case. But that is not a global thing. That is very specific based on complete contextual cues. And that's how we deal with, oh, this is a particularly dangerous situation. We can step in and prepare for it before the bad thing happens. But otherwise, Keith is right. On a general,
it's like quarantining somebody who's known to have a deadly disease versus locking down an entire economy. It's the same thing. If you see somebody drive up to the school parking lot and he opens his trunk and he's putting on bulletproof armor and, steel-toed, boots and helmet and all the stuff, and taking out all these guns and locking and loading, and he has an angry expression on his face, and he starts to march towards the school door, not only shouldering the weapon, but, pulling the safety, locking and loading. Yeah, you have a reasonable presumption here, a probable cause, this guy intends murder. And
or even if they told someone, I'm going to go do this, and the person calls the police and stop, right? But that idea of probable cause is contextually oriented. When we're talking about the principle of, can we stop people before they do harm? The answer is yes, in particular cases where we have specific information, but not as a global principle.
Right, versus
not as a global policy.
To fill out a form and wait 3 days before they prove that they have the right to have a gun. That's prior restraint, and it's like locking down an entire society versus quarantining somebody who's known to have Ebola.
And in Bastiat's famous seen and unseen fallacy, the number of women and vulnerable people who have been murdered and or assaulted in that waiting period, if people only saw the numbers of those victims, they might have a different opinion about whether those waiting periods were actually good or not. Any final things to say, Amy, with respect to Hunter Biden?
Let's get to the pets.
Yes, let's get to the pets. And I think it was The Guardian had this article on whether or not it's ethical to own pets. And there were some interesting points that were made here with respect to the psychology of animals and is the human element, when added to this dynamic, healthy for the animal or not? Now, look, I've worked in Morocco, and I have seen feral dogs and cats. They're not in good condition. They're not happier being the way they are. I think a conscientious pet owner is a very good thing for an animal. They live much healthier, longer lives than any animal does in the wild. And there are ways in which they could stimulate the animal's mind. I think that is definitely something to think about. But there is sort of a anti-human malevolence that rides through this article, as many good points as it makes. Amy, do you agree with that, or did you find it entirely benevolent?
No. There were some very skewed and extremely messed up approaches to human life and animal life in this article, and all with under the guise of, we're trying to make the animal lives as the best life an animal can have. It was disingenuous, and I have a lot of problems with it. But I'll just say this about pets: the cats are already out of the bag. So pets are no longer wild. So cats and dogs, all the different breeds, including domestic rabbits, by the way, that I'm a fan of. I love bunnies. And they're not capable, if you put them out into the wild, they're not capable of fending for themselves, maybe for a little time, but not very long. They are man-made. And they're made for a specific purpose of bringing comfort to human beings And of course, there is a trade. And of course, there are a lot of optional values with regard to all of this about how much time do you put in, how much medical treatment, do you give Fuzzy Wuzzy the chemo treatment or not? All sorts of interesting questions there. But I think those come down to, as a human being, as a person, what are your values? The values of animals, their perceptual beings, that they can't decide for themselves and they can't fend for themselves. So the question is, what do you do? The thing I don't think you do is what this person in this article is saying is treat them cradle to grave, worry about whether or not they're bored if you're gone for a couple of hours. I mean, there's some very, I think, inappropriate and irrational things that this person is trying to advocate for.
Yes, Keith, it seems to me that people really don't like human joy, and they're trying to step on every aspect of human joy we have. And a big part of my joy in life are my dogs and my cat. I love these guys. I love them. I love being around them. I love pampering them and treating them like a human being, which I probably shouldn't do. But what did you see this anti-human element sort of?
Yeah, I was going to say, this is the mentality of the, for lack of a better word, social justice left, is every time they discover some aspect of human happiness or human joy, immediately it's, oh, you shouldn't give enriched education to your child because it's unfair. There's another child somewhere in the world who doesn't get it. Oh, you shouldn't be able to have a car that has an internal combustion engine. You shouldn't have a pet. You shouldn't have this. It's unethical to have life extending drugs. You should die when your appointed time, occurs. Every time they find that humans are doing something better than living savages, subsisting on the landscape and killing each other for food, the way it was done for hundreds of thousands of years. Anytime anybody aspires to rise above that level of subsistence and brutality and misery, then they're there to try to guilt you and shame you. It's Greta, waggling her fingers. How dare you? How dare you have a pet? Well,
geez, can I interject real quick? I just want to quote from this article because this is a wacky article. So to give you a flavor, says, we are asking animals to fill a very human need, says this person. People are looking for unconditional love, but that love is predicated on this absolute domination of the pet's life, what they eat, their sexuality, their love, their activity. And you can't disentangle these two things. If pets had more autonomy, he says, they would not necessarily have this unconditional love. There are a lot of problems with this.
Yeah, there's a lot of problems. It's treating a sentient being as if it's a rational being, as if it has rights and understands precisely how to live its life in a way that will actually promote it. And I can't say that about my animals, that's for sure. One of my dogs only has like 12 teeth. I don't think he'd do well out there on his own in an autonomous state. Mark, what say you? Were there any good points to the article, though? Was there anything valid in this article, despite the malignant, anti-human, anti-happiness elements pervading it? I found one or two gems. Like, I do think, there is an animal psychology. I do think certain animals and certain breeds need certain things. A sheepdog, they need to herd. A hunting dog, they need, certain dogs need to run and run and run and run and run and run. They can't be trapped in a house. It's terrible for them. The African parrot, as they said, will tear its own feathers out of boredom. They're extremely intelligent animals that live for 70 or 80 years. You should, I think, make some concessions to the nature of the animal and understand that its psychology and well-being is good for you too, that it's happy and that it's happy and fulfilled, right? Or am I wrong?
No. So of course, you said the thing. I care for my animals. I love my animals. And therefore, I want to figure out what psychologically is best for them and provide it for them so that they can thrive. Why? Because I love them. Because I care about them, and I love my animals. One of my girlfriends had a an umbrella cockatoo, kind of like the African gray parrot, very smart, had an extensive vocabulary, and trying to create an environment in which that animal was psychologically well is not an easy thing, because it's a very complex creature. And so we put in a lot of work in order to create environments because we cared about it. It's our pet. And I think all of that is great. And again, like much of the social justice movement, it gets you to ask questions which are valuable questions. Do you care about your pet? Should you take care of them psychologically? The answer is, if you care about your pet, you should take care of them psychologically. And confronting that, which is not easy, confronting that is a very valuable thing. The question is, when it comes to regulation, how should we, the elite group, tell other people how they should take care of their pets, what kind of pets they can have, what kind of pets they can't have, how they need to treat them? It's the control aspect that I think is the only problem with this piece. Each person is saying, I think that this matters. Great, you're sharing your values. That might be persuasive to people. Someone might choose not to get a pet that has a complex psychological need because this article got them to think it through where they hadn't thought it through before. Incredibly valuable. But the part that, of course, is behind the whole thing is we should control this. We, the smart people, the elite people, the people who care, should tell those rubes what they can and can't do.
Right.
And that's right. That's the part that obviously it's off the rails. It's sick. It's evil. It's disgusting. And it's quite frankly infuriating. But I love pets. Are you kidding? Oh, yes. I loved my little bird. Oh, by the way, the bird was a male, and he thought that my girlfriend was his mate. And so he was so smart. He would snuggle up to me, and he would be sweet, and then he would bite the crap out of me. I have scars because those beaks are crazy. But it took months. We had to go see a psychologist to go, no, he's not suddenly getting mad at you. He's tempting you. He's drawing you in so that he can bite you. He's an evil cockatoo. They're
very
smart. And
yeah.
you need to take that into account.
That's right. So we're look, guys, full disclosure, I'm for pet ownership. They enrich our lives. They make us happy. Part of that is that you're caring for something that you love, and that includes its psychology, its body, everything about it. You're caring for. So you can be selfish and a great pet owner at the same time. In fact, I think it's obligatory. If you're selfish in the way we objectivists mean it, then you are caring for your values. Quickly, before we conclude the show, I have a special announcement. This Saturday at 4 p.m. UK time, Jim Brown is launching his new course on money creation and its consequences. This course is an exclusive for ARCUK Platinum members and above. Upcoming shows, 10 p.m. UK time. Today, TV Talk with me, Jennifer Bueni, and Jacqueline Schumann on Peaky Blinders Season 1. Very interesting show, folks. So tune in, see what our opinions are about it. I think it'll be stimulating. Guys, thanks for the stimulating talk today. It was very good, very thought-provoking for me. I hope it was thought-provoking for you out there watching. If it was, like and subscribe. Keep this content going. And always remember, folks, to check your premises. Until next time, peace.